All right, welcome, Alex. We're going to get started in just a sec here. Wait for people to log in. All right, we got more people coming in here. All right, we're about to get started here. We've just got people logging in, so I'm just waiting for everybody to get logged in. Give it a couple more minutes here. All right, welcome, Brady. We're just waiting for people to get logged in here. All right, just remember that the way this works is if you can make two contributions where you're either asking a question or you're responding to a question that I ask, two substantial contributions, not like a one-word answer, but like an actual substantial contribution, then you get the credit for the homework, which I'm going to send out as a part of this in just a little bit. So it doesn't do you a lot of good to join and then not say anything for the entire time. I mean, you do get some credit, but it's better to respond and or ask questions if you're curious about things, because you will get the credit for the written homework. You won't have to do that. So, all right. See if there's anyone else. All right. Going to get started here. So in one of the two classes, we did do the Vikings slide, but I think in the other class, we didn't get to it. So just as a quick recap, for some of you, and for some of you, you're looking at this for the first time. The Vikings were, oh, got another person. The Vikings were another group that were raiding Europe at this time. So remember, we had the Saracens coming in from the south, the Magyars coming in from the east, and the Vikings coming in from the north. And really, the warrior skills were legendary in a lot of ways. They were bigger, taller, had these giant battle axes, and would go into berserker rages. And they had no mercy on anyone. Just writing down people who are showing up here. And they had no mercy on anyone who was, a member of the church or anything like that. They would destroy a monastery just as quickly as they would destroy a castle or anything else. And so, looks like we got more people coming. All right, admit. Just write these names down real quick here. All right, so their ships had these. They were pretty shallow, and everybody, had a oar, and they would row, and so they were basically able to go up rivers, and so the Viking longships, they had these distinctive red and white sails, and whenever anyone saw them, they would run, and because of the constant raids that took place during the Dark Ages. Uh, we talked about this a little bit, but does anybody want to guess or tell me what is going on in terms of how people structure their society in Europe as a way of dealing with the danger of constantly having to worry about these raiders from these various parts of the world outside of Europe? What do people willingly give up in order to get protection from people who have armor and weapons and are able to fight off the Vikings? Go ahead, Alex.
Isn't this when the feudal system like started to come about?
Yeah. So this is really going to accelerate the growth of the feudal system, which we're going to talk about in just a bit here. So the Vikings really become kind of legendary in European, folklore. As a matter of fact, Hitler would later refer back to the Nordic race as kind of this master race, and a lot of that is born just out of the respect that people had for their warrior ability. But they won't calm down, and they won't stop raiding until they're finally Christianized by Christian missionaries. Oh, we got another person. All right. So that is the Vikings. And that takes us actually to, yeah, go ahead, Brady. What were you going to say?
So more about the Vikings. Are we going to talk about like Danegeld?
The Danegelts, we weren't going to get into that much detail because this is part of that section in world history where we're just hitting highlights until we get to 1200. So this is really like the 800s, 900s. So, we're not diving into a lot of detail, but you do need to know like basic highlights in order to make sense of things later. So unfortunately, we don't have time to really dive into the Vikings. It's a great question, though. So the Vikings actually do end up establishing a kingdom, according to legend. Again, there are people who dispute this, but according to legend, there were some Vikings under a guy named Rurik who landed up here near Lake Ladoga, and then kind of basically established themselves as a noble class in Central Asia among these various tribes that are collectively known as the Slavic tribes. We did refer to them earlier. We said that, in the Indian Ocean Trade Network, this is where the word slave came from. Because Slavic peoples were often captured and then brought into the Indian Ocean Trade Network as slaves. But the Slavic tribes in this area were conquered and united by these Vikings that came in, who became known as the Varangians. So this is, a picture of the quote invitation of the Varangians. And it's where they invite them to become their kings. And they establish a city up in the north called Novgorod. And that was established by Rurik. Two other warriors, Askold and Deer, went south and established the city of Kiev. And then later, Rurik's successor, his son, he was the regent for his son, Prince Oleg, went south and overthrew Askold and Deer and basically took over Kiev and established a kingdom that united both Novgorod and Kiev and expanded to territories in a large area around them. This is what we call Kievan Rus. And Kievan Rus basically is the foundation for what society that we now are very familiar with. It's actually one of the big countries in the world.
Is it Ukraine?
Okay, well, Julia, Ukraine was once part of this, but you are very close because Kiev is the capital of Ukraine. Uh,
Mm.
Alex, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say Russia.
Russia, yeah, and then Brady was at that. Yeah, you were going to say that as well. So,
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
all right, so, but yes, but Julia, you are correct that the Ukraine was actually part of this area and considered part of Russia for a very long time. I mean, it's only been, a very recent time that they've been an independent country. So this is the foundations of Russia. And Russia was just kind of this barbaric group of warriors until some missionaries ended up coming up from the Byzantine Empire. So uh, the Byzantine uh, you know, patriarch was sending missionaries out into Europe, and just like the Pope was over in Rome, and they Christianized the Rus people under Vladimir the Great, and Vladimir the Great became the first Christian prince of Rus. And then he basically had his people convert to Christianity, and Cyril and Methodius were the names of these two missionaries, and Cyril actually developed an alphabet for the people of Rus, which is still the alphabet that they use today. If you've ever seen anyone write in Russian, they've got some letters that look familiar, but they like backwards and like upside down. And so the Cyrillic alphabet is kind of one of the gifts that these missionaries bring, and of course, this civilizes this group, this barbaric group, and kind of turns it into more of a stable civilization slash country. All right, that takes us to Alfred the Great. Looks like Ali is not here, so I'll just do this. But uh, this is coming back to the Viking raids. Okay, so the Anglo-Saxons, if you may remember when we talked about the Anglo-Saxon invasion uh, of Britain, because Britain was originally occupied by Celtic tribes, which had been pushed over into kind of these areas here, Cornwall, Wales, and what would later become parts of Scotland. Um, and the Anglo-Saxons had established 7 kingdoms. Okay, Wessex being the most important of the 7 kingdoms, but Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia, etc. And there was a king named Alfred who basically he's the king of Wessex, and he is the only king that has any success in defending his kingdom against the invading Vikings. The Vikings actually overthrow several of these kingdoms: East Anglia, Essex. Mercia barely survives, but is conquered for a little while. Northumbria is taken over, and uh, so Alfred the Great becomes very important, and the Vikings under Guthrum and one of the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, because Ragnar Lothbrok, according to legend, was killed by the king of Mercia, King Eowyn. They basically establish a territory known as the Danelaw. So Britain is interesting. The English people are a mix of the old Celtic tribes, the invading Anglo-Saxon tribes, which are Germanic in their ethnicity, and then another invading group of Vikings who settle down. So English are kind of a mix of all of these, and then of course we're going to have the Norman invasion later as well. But Alfred basically is his dream is to unite all of the 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms under Anglo-Saxon control and make it a united England. And of course, his son Edward the Elder and his grandson Ethelstan would eventually accomplish that dream. I don't know if anybody's seen the Netflix series The Last Kingdom, but anyone seen that? But that is actually about Alfred the Great, and his struggle against the Vikings. These two pictures here of Guthrum well, this one, Guthrum, is from that series, and then Ivor the Boneless is from the series Vikings. But anyway, that is kind of the foundations of what later become England. And as Brady said, these constant invasions basically forced nobles to build these buildings that you couldn't easily overcome by force of arms, which were called castles. And castles would have these stone walls, and they would be built so that people who are up on the top of the walls would have ample opportunity to rain projectiles down upon anyone who was trying to assault the castle. So in order to get into the castle, you would either have to break through the gate, and often there was an entire, building called the gatehouse that would make it very difficult to do that. They could like pour boiling oil down on you and light you on fire and shoot you with arrows and things like that, and drop rocks on you. And then so you would either have to break through the gate, and part of that was getting through the gatehouse, and there would be like a drawbridge, there'd be like water, a moat right around it, makes it even harder to climb the walls. Or you would have to try to put ladders up against the walls and climb over. And so they were very difficult to take, even for the Vikings. And if you had a castle, not only could you withstand a Viking raid or a Saracen raid or a Magyar raid, but you could also project your power into an area. And so under kind of Charlemagne's, three kingdoms that were developed from his three sons, you had this system of castles and lords. And the lords all basically they didn't own their land. The land was basically given to them by the king in what was known as a fief. So some of you may have learned this already, but a fief would then be divided into smaller fiefs. So like, for instance, you'd have a baron. A baron got a big chunk of land from the king, but then the baron needed people who would come and fight for him. So he would give each lord a small little piece of land, which would be called a manor. And then those lords, when they were called upon, it was, they had to swear fealty. In other words, they had to swear their loyalty and go out and fight on behalf of the Lord. So who's on the very bottom of this system? I think we talked about this just a little bit ago, but what group is kind of the group that is, going to support the whole system? Yes, Brady.
The serfs.
The serfs. And what is their job? Like what do they get, and what do they get, and what do they give in return?
They're basically slaves, except they can't be bought and sold.
Okay. And what labor are they providing?
Usually manual.
Okay.
So like farming and such.
Yeah. So in your manor system, which we're going to cover, they're basically doing farming labor. And what do they get in return, Brady?
Protection, but that's about it.
Yeah. So whenever the Vikings come and raid, they have little villages in the areas surrounding the castle. The Lord is supposed to come out of his castle, and he's supposed to go and fight the Vikings for them, or they could flee into the castle. Now, of course, that all meant that they had to actually get there in time, or the Lord had to get there in time to help them, which often didn't happen. But this system of kind of pretty much slave labor that is developed is known as corvée labor. And they do this labor in return for protection from their Lord. And of course, as time goes by, when you're farming the same land over and over again and you don't use fertilizer, you exhaust the soil. And so they end up working the soil in a rotating system. Yes, Taya, what were you going to say?
What is like the role of a lord? Like what do the lords do? Like I don't.
So a lord is a knight. Okay, so that is like the lowest level of the nobility, and
Okay.
they swear fealty to a higher lord, usually like a baron or a duke, and that baron or duke then swears fealty to the king. But everybody is loyal to the king, who kind of owns all of the territory. But the knights, they have enough money from their manor to basically buy armor and a horse and things like that. So when they go into battle, would you rather, if you were in battle, would you rather be on foot or would you rather be on a horse?
On a horse.
Yeah, you would have much better chance of survival. You would you'd be able to do more damage. And so they're going to make up a large part of what is known as the cavalry, although some of them do fight on foot as well. And then of course they're going to pass this on to their sons. Brady, did you have a question? You have your hand up, or just forget to put your hand down?
Yeah, I just forgot to put my hand down. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no problem. So they're going to pass this on to their sons in a system known as primogeniture. So here's another question for you. Say you're a lord and you have a manor, like you're like a knight, and you have 3 sons. How do you pass on your inheritance? Like, what do you do in order to keep, like, because when Charlemagne had his big kingdom and he split it up between well, he gave it to his son Louis the Pious, but then Louis the Pious split it up between his 3 sons. That broke the kingdom into 3 pieces. So what do you have to end up doing in order to keep your land from continuing to be broken up into smaller and smaller pieces, if you have more than 1 son? Because daughters generally didn't get to inherit land. Taya, you were about to say something. What were you going to say?
Did they like give it to their oldest son or something?
Yeah. So you can see this underlined here. It's called primogeniture, where the oldest son gets everything. All right. So the second oldest son gets nothing except money. They are well supported. They have an income. Um, and all depends on like how high up, but like the second son would often like go into the church as a way of becoming powerful in his own right, etc. But the eldest son would inherit everything. And then, because this area had been Christianized and there was an attempt to impose Christian morality on these Frankish tribes that were very much barbaric and warrior like, um, they had a code of honor known as chivalry. So if you've ever read any of the old tales of like King Arthur, at some point you have a picture of what chivalry was supposed to look like. And of course that's people much later on kind of imposing their worldview on, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. It's not exactly accurate, but um it's in a sense, there, it does transmit the basics. You don't fight somebody who doesn't have a weapon. You want to make it a fair fight. Ladies were to be treated with a certain level of respect. You don't just go around murdering people without any consequence, etc. And as time goes by, you're also going to have some other groups that are going to emerge, who are a little more sophisticated than your basic peasant farmer serfs. You're going to have craftsmen who are basically skilled in various things, like being a blacksmith or being a carpenter. And you're also going to have merchants who are going to operate businesses where they trade with other areas, and are going to have stores and places where people can buy things in towns. So that is basically how feudal Europe develops. And one of the great institutions that is going to dominate feudal Europe is the Catholic Church. And see, somebody picked this. Kristen and Nick are both not here. So the medieval Catholic Church wants to project its power into medieval society, and they do have a lot of power. Most people in the feudal system, most of the serfs anyway, people who are in this lower class, this area here, are illiterate. Meaning, what does illiterate mean? Anyone?
They can't read.
They can't read, yeah. And so therefore, what is the collection of writings that basically tells everybody what God wants, what Christianity is. What collection of writings is kind of the authority in Christianity?
The Bible.
The Bible.
Okay, so if you have a lot of people who can't read, and you have this collection of writings that is supposed to be the authority of what God wants, and of course, that is very important because it's kind of has this, importance that goes beyond just what's happening in the world. What who then gets to interpret everything? Anyone? Who serves as the interpreter between the written book and the people who can't read?
Is it the Pope?
Okay, the Pope is like the one who is going to be like the very top level person who speaks for God. But then of course he's going to have people under him. Like, what are some of the levels of people under him?
Oh, a
Priest.
monk.
Okay, you have your monks, and then who else?
Bishop. An archbishop,
Priest.
right?
Priests. Okay. And then of course you're going to have your very high level priests, which are your bishops. And so the church exercises incredible power over people because they just believe whatever the church tells them about God. So like, if the church were to tell them, hey, we have this thing that you have to do, but it isn't actually in the Bible, are they going to know that it's not in the Bible?
No.
No. Okay. So they can add things to what they're telling people, and so they have this real incredible power. As long as people are illiterate and as long as people can't read the Bible for themselves, they are the interpreters. And yeah, go ahead, Alex. What was your question?
I was just gonna ask if this was like the foundation for like what Martin Luther did, like when the church charged people to get to heaven. Is this
Yeah.
kind of like where it originated?
This is where that originates. Yes, the indulgence system. Right. They can just add that because is that in the Bible? Indulgences, where you have to pay for these little prayers to move your relatives through the various levels of heaven.
No.
No, that's not in there. So basically, they can just add things in. And of course, eventually that's going to lead to the Reformation, which we'll talk about in much more detail when we get to it. But yeah, so eventually the church is going to get so powerful, then they're going to get people to build these incredible buildings. The cathedrals. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Europe and has seen one of these, but these buildings are just absolutely amazing pieces of architecture. So this is the Notre Dame Cathedral, which we just recently was in the news because there was a fire there. This is Reims, the Lincoln Cathedral, but incredible, works of, architecture, and especially because they didn't have, like the steel superstructure that we now have for buildings. They had to make these things stand up and not fall over just with wood and stone. But people would go in and they would hear the mass, but the mass would be in Latin. So of course, this was all the church kind of would guard its secrets very well in order to kind of keep control over the people. And this was so powerful that they could even challenge the power of the kings. So King Henry the Fourth was like a king of Germany, and the Pope Pope Gregory the Seventh didn't like some things he was doing, and they were like at odds with each other. And so he actually did something to him called excommunicating him. So does anybody know or want to guess what is excommunication? Go ahead. I saw a bunch of hands. Julie, I'll let you go first. Go ahead.
Isn't it like where they can't have any more like connection to the church?
Okay. Yes, that is correct. You are cut off from the church completely. But what does that mean for your soul? What is that going to do to you eternally after you die?
You like can't go to heaven.
You can't go to heaven, right? Yeah, you are cast out, so to speak. And so the Catholic Church had this power, and so when King Henry IV was excommunicated by Pope Gregory VII, he had like everybody around him just was like looking at him like he had, like a disease. Like he lost all of his excuse me, respect and authority. And he actually had to go back and beg the Pope for forgiveness. He had to go out. The Pope was in this castle up in the Alps in Italy, uh, at Canossa, and King Henry IV had to basically dress in poor robes and barefoot in the snow come and beg the Pope for forgiveness. And of course, the Pope is supposed to be, you know, God is supposed to have mercy on people, and he's the representative of God. So of course he had to forgive him. But it really did show that popes had this real power. Even kings had to do what popes said. And you had these various holy men that were you could basically become a monk and like gain a certain level of respect and power just on how holy your life was. So you had your various people who become famous for their holiness. Saint Bernard, if you were really up there in terms of how holy your life was, you could become a saint. So Saint Bernard of Clairvaux is actually going to be this monk who's going to have a lot of authority just because of the way he lives his life, who then will end up being very important in the Crusades. So that is the medieval Catholic Church. And real quick, before we move on from kind of medieval Europe, we do want to talk about the merchant class, because the merchant class in Europe is the connection that Europe has with other parts of the world. And so these are because Europe is kind of like almost like a backwoods, like it's kind of cut off. It's kind of not nearly as civilized as, say, for instance, the Islamic world or China. And so there's two areas which become like hubs of trade. Looks like Warner's joining us. The first area is up here. It's an area known as Flanders. And that is now like parts of northern France and Belgium and the Netherlands and that whole area. And they were actually trading with Britain or the English, because the English would raise sheep, and then the wool that was made would basically be traded to weavers, and weavers would of course turn it into cloth, which would be used for all kinds of clothing that people had. And then down here in the Mediterranean, in the Italian area, the Italian peninsula, there were all kinds of merchants as well. And merchants and craftsmen like tried to guard the secrets of their trade, like how to do certain things by creating these things known as guilds. So if you wanted to be part of the guild, you had to start out as an apprentice and you had to work your way up. And that kind of, became another way for people to escape, the drudgery of being a peasant, where you were just working out in the fields all day. So that is that. And of course, I was going to get into more detail here on the guilds. And essentially, the guilds are where you have these craftsmen who, get a particular trade going and then develop products or make things for people or help build buildings, etc. And really, the reason that they would create them is so they could control the trade of a particular type in a town. And so the guild's merchant, is the person who would basically assure that all the trade of the town would be in the hand of the guilds. And you basically had them kind of dominating trade for a while. You had your various craft guilds that specialized in the creation of certain things. And if you were going to be in a guild at the age of 7, a young man would basically become an apprentice, and then he would work for a master craftsman, someone who would teach him the trade for 7 years in return for room and board and clothing and a set of tools. And then after that, he would become a journeyman, and then eventually he would become a master craftsman himself. So that was kind of one of the more sophisticated parts of Europe, which was otherwise pretty backwards. Yes, Julia, what were you going to say?
I was going to ask if it was in Europe, but you answered my question. So.
Yeah, so that's part of Europe. And again, Europe is considered kind of backwaterish compared to the rest of the world. But the reason that we have to focus on it is they are going to eventually kind of become the dominant culture that is going to take over other parts of the world, even the once great civilizations in India, and they're even going to humiliate China. So it is kind of one of the big interesting stories of world history as to why Europeans, go from being so backwards and so uh, unable to like compete, in terms of knowledge and civilization and whatnot, to being this dominant force later on in history. All right, and that takes us over to Japan. So in Japan, we talked about the emperor and the emperor being kind of in control. But in 1192, one of the one of the samurai generals. The samurai, by the way, were these warriors. You could kind of compare the samurai to knights in Europe, okay? And by the way, Japan has a very similar feudal system. And so one of the things that they love to do on essays is to compare the feudal systems of Japan and medieval Europe. But the shogun was like a knight, and basically, the shogun was like a duke or a baron, but basically they had these armies of samurai who were like knights, and of course you had various nobles um, called the daimyo, who are like your lower level people who are also nobles, and they would get a parcel of territory in return for their loyalty to the shogun. And the shogun became so powerful that he actually ended up running Japan. Even though everybody paid lip service to the emperor didn't really have any power. Everything was decided by the shogun. The samurai, by the way, were master swordsmen. Their competition with each other caused them to develop, their skills to the point where they were probably some of the best swordsmen in the world at the time. And they had a strict code of honor called Bushido, which if you were dishonored, you would commit ritual suicide, seppuku, to instead of having to deal with the shame of being dishonored. The Kamakura shogunate became the new government of Japan. And of course, there are some obvious similarities to Europe. So anybody, what are some of the similarities that exist between Japan and Europe at this time? Anyone? Between medieval Japan and medieval Europe? You have in Europe, you have the feudal system, where you have your various lords who kind of run things, and you have your knights. Yes, Brady.
You have kind of one person calling like all the shots.
Okay, all right. And do they give out land to other people who then are in
Yes.
return, give their loyalty? So you have that in both the Japan and medieval Europe. In Japan, what is the guy who controls all the land named?
The shogun.
The shogun. And then who are the nobles that he gives the land to called?
The daimyos of the samurai.
Yeah, the daimyos and the samurai. And that is very similar to Europe, where it's, your barons and dukes and whatnot, and then your knights, your lords. A lord is a knight, basically. And then what else is similar in terms of code of honor? The Bushido, you could compare Bushido. Yes, Julia.
Like that could be compared to like the excommunication of like the church. Like
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
Since they had to like kill themselves like after, so basically like they couldn't like go to heaven. I don't know.
Okay, you're on the right track. Was there also another code of honor in terms of how to treat women and how to like fight in a fair fight in Europe that you can remember that we talked about? Starts with a C. That's also part of. I'm gonna go like this. I'm going to point at it real quick. If you
Oh, chivalry.
Chivalry, yes. So chivalry and Bushido are often compared in terms of like, you know, and it's two systems that develop on opposite sides of the world completely on their own, kind of in isolation from each other. So it's very interesting to kind of compare the two. So as we were just talking about here, you do have this hierarchy. The king is on the top in Europe and the shogun is on the top in Japan. Then you have your nobles, your daimyos, your knights, which are like your samurai. And then you have your peasants at the bottom in Europe. And actually merchants are kind of like in between peasants and knights. So merchants have like a higher level kind of respect. But farmers and fishermen are actually above merchants in Japan. Merchants are placed at the very bottom because the Japanese said they don't really make anything. They just profit off the labor of other people. So, you know, that is kind of your comparison of the two cultures there. All right. And that takes us to the Great Schism in Christianity, where Christianity actually kind of breaks into two separate denominations or religions, and it looks like Avery and Jeremiah have this, but neither one of them are here. So I'll do this. But if anybody wants to jump in, I know Alex, you're kind of looking at this anyway. But the Byzantine emperor had basically asked for Pope Leo's help on a number of occasions. He considered Pope Leo to be like a bishop, like an important bishop, but someone who was supposed to be under his authority. And basically, he noticed that a number of the churches in Constantinople were adopting Latin rites, which are like the traditions that were used over in Western Europe in the way they did things in their church, you know, like the various, you know, traditional things they did. And so he basically was worried about this Caesaropapism, where he felt like the Pope was becoming too much like a Caesar, like he was becoming too powerful. And so Michael Cerularius, who was the Patriarch of Constantinople, basically, you know, decided to kind of put the Pope in his place. And when the Pope, which at the time was Pope Leo, Leo the Ninth, had claimed that he was the head of the whole church, Cerularius basically, you know, got into a confrontation with him. He rejected Leo's claim. Leo sent a very, you know, a guy who had a lot of, you know, a reputation for having a bad temper, Cardinal Humbert, to go and be his emissary. And while Cardinal Humbert was on the way, Pope Leo actually died of old age. But the Pope's emissary didn't know that, and so he was still going on behalf of the Pope. And Cardinal Humbert basically went into a church and disrespected the whole church and all of its. I think it was he went into the Hagia Sophia, and he basically put down an order where the Pope excommunicated the Patriarch, and of course then the Patriarch excommunicated the Pope, and the two sides of the church split. And the eastern side became known as the Eastern Orthodox Church, which had a lot of influence down in this Balkan region and up in Russia. And then the western side became the Roman Catholic Church. Alex, I know you're doing your project on this. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was it.
That pretty much covers it. Yeah. So in 1054, the church splits into its two branches. The Roman Catholic Church in the west and the Eastern Orthodox in the east. And that takes us to the Battle of Hastings. Looks like, Alex, this is yours. So I'm going to let you kind of take over I know somebody in another class has this as well. It looks like they can either send me their stuff later or pick a different slide. So go ahead.
All right, so the Battle of Hastings was a battle fought for the control of England on October 14th, 1066. It was fought between the Anglo-Saxons, led by King Harold Godwinson, and the Normans, led by William, Duke of Normandy. Both Harold Hardrada, King of Norway, and Tostig Godwinson, brother of Harold Godwinson, attempted to take the throne but were killed in the Battle of Stamford Bridge.
Okay, so hold on just a sec. Hold on just a sec. So we've got all these different kings coming from different locations. Where exactly is William, Duke of Normandy, coming from, and where is Harold Hardrada coming from? Because Godwinson is in charge of England. So where are these two other guys coming from?
So William's coming from Normandy, which is kind of in modern day France.
Okay, so right, yeah, like right here, if I'm pointing to it on the map here, this is it. This is Normandy. He's coming across the English Channel. So Godwinson has to fight two different kings who are trying to invade England at the same time. Where is Hardrada coming from?
He's coming from Norway, which is
Coming from
in
up here.
Scandinavia.
Okay, so you're saying that first he has to go up and fight Hardrada up here at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, right?
Yes.
All right. Do you have any details on the Battle of Stamford Bridge, like what happens there, or do you just kind of have the outcome there?
I don't really. All I was really able to find was that Harold Hardrada died.
Yeah, the reason that they are able to win that battle is because they catch him by surprise. Like their Harold Hardrada and his men have already beaten a northern army up here, and they're just kind of camped out, and they're not really like in formation. And Godwinson's army just surprises them and massacres them. Like, I mean, it's a battle still, and there's actually like skulls with giant axe cleavage marks in them from this battle that are still kind of archaeological remains. But yeah, not easy to beat a Viking army. So after beating one Viking army, what does he do next?
He has to travel all the way down to the south side of England.
Okay, so he travels all the way back down to the south side of England, and he gets ready for another invasion force, which is by this William, Duke of Normandy, who's also, by the way, the Normans are people who were Vikings who settled in this northern area of France. They were under a guy named Rollo who settled this area. So they have both Frankish and Viking blood. And they come across and tell us about this battle.
So William and King Harold led their armies into battle on that day in October. And the Normans actually brought 14,000 men over on 700 ships across the English Isle. And then the Normans ultimately won the battle. And King Harold, he supposedly was shot in the eye with an arrow. No one knows if that was really true. That might just be legend. And then the Norman victory ultimately led to the Norman conquest of England.
Yeah, so they had these the Anglo-Saxons under Godwinson, Harold Godwinson, they had like this shield wall that they would put up, and then the Normans like were not able to break the shield wall, and then finally they like fired their arrows up into the air so they would come down on top of them, and that was how they were able to then break through the shield wall when a bunch of people got hit from those arrows that went up high and then came back down. So it was a very close battle. But what's the result of this battle, the Battle of Hastings in 1066?
So the result is that the Normans, like a lot of Norman ideals and culture, ultimately just mixed with the Anglo-Saxon culture, and it spread to the English.
Yeah,
Isle.
because who becomes the new king of England when this battle's over?
William does.
William, yeah. So William, who's kind of this Viking / French person, becomes the new king of England. So French culture, French language becomes part of English. So really, England, which is going to one day have one of the greatest empires in the world and dominate, large parts of the planet, is a mix of, the Celtic and the Anglo-Saxon and the Viking and the French Viking, kind of, all being mixed together. And so that, has an effect on their language and on their culture. So very important battle, 1066, Battle of Hastings. And Alex, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I just found this cool fact that like Normans, when they were in England, they used nicer and fancier words to describe themselves. So like someone who was Norman would, let's see, I wrote this down. He might enter a chamber, but an Anglo-Saxon would just walk into a room. So they use these fancier words that we kind of use as synonyms, but they were originally used as like nicer words for the Normans.
Yeah, it's a way of setting yourself apart and making yourself seem more cultured, more fancy, more civilized. Yeah, better than the other groups. Yes. Okay, very good. So that's the Battle of Hastings. All right, we do need to return down to the Middle East and talk about a new empire that kind of emerges at this time. And this is known as the Seljuk Turks. Okay, so kind of the basis of modern day Turkey in terms of their culture and everything. And they had a homeland in Central Asia, and they migrated into the Middle East, kind of one of the great migrations of medieval times. And they basically came into mainland Persia. Eventually, though, they settled in Anatolia, which is now modern day Turkey. And their leader was a guy named Alp Arslan. And they won a very important battle in 1071 against the Byzantine Empire, the Battle of Manzikert. And this actually is, and they're actually going to end up getting control of the Middle East as well. And that's going to become one of the reasons why the First Crusade is going to happen, is because of the Turks kind of coming in and taking a bunch of territory away from the Byzantine Empire. So the Seljuk Empire will later decline in the 1100s when the Mongols kind of get in, become powerful and get into their area. So that is the Seljuk Turks. And that part of a larger story that we have been kind of hitting here and there. But as time goes by, the Byzantine Empire, which is the last remnant of the once great Roman Empire, loses more and more territory. So what religion is really kind of driving a lot of the invasion of the empire from this direction? Anybody? What is the great religion that kind of runs a lot of these groups that are basically in this area, that have taken over the Middle East? Islam. Okay, so Islam basically is the religion that kind of is a part of that. And so you can see the Seljuks kind of create their great sultanate. They take over like this whole peninsula. Constantinople, is like right here. And then the Byzantines are later able to get part of it back. And the Seljuks kind of disintegrate into a bunch of little kingdoms, little sultanates. But during the there's also another group called the Bulgars who become a real problem. They're this barbarian tribe. And they basically become a real problem for the Byzantine Empire over here in on this side, over in the Balkan Peninsula in Europe. And so eventually they're going to lose control of much of this area. And then what will really weaken the Byzantine Empire more than anything else is the people that they invite to come and help them fight the forces of Islam are going to end up actually taking over Constantinople for a little while, and that will be the Crusaders during the Fourth Crusade. So when we get to the Crusades, we'll talk about this, but this is going to lead to the Byzantine Empire getting weaker and weaker, and they'll just air control this area around Constantinople, but it's a very hard city to take. And so actually that takes us to the Crusades. And I don't think either Sunny or Christian are here. So we'll have to, all I'll have to take this one here. But in 1096, Pope Urban II made a speech at Claremont where he basically he said that the Holy Land, the land where, you know, Jesus had walked, was being trampled, and the bones of the saints were being you know, kind of treated like garbage by these heathen Muslims. And so the First Crusade was basically a holy war. You could almost, in many ways, compare it to what kind of holy war that was fought by people from another faith. Anybody remember another type of holy war that we talked about? Starts with a J. Fought by the people who were Muslim? No?
Wasn't it the jihad?
The jihad, very good, yes. So the jihad basically was very similar in a lot of ways to the Crusades, but this holy war was, the whole point of it was to go and reclaim the Holy Land from the Muslims. And so if you took the cross, if you got the cross on your forehead and you took it, it was like with a little, they would often do it with dirt, or you, and oftentimes people would wear like a tunic or have a shield that had a red cross on it. You were then, you know, fighting this war for God, and God would reward you someday in heaven. You would go down and you would basically end up fighting for control of the Holy Land. And there are 9 crusades. We're not going to get into the details of all of them again, because this is before the time period where we're really going to slow down and kind of get, you know, more focused. But you have the First Crusade, which actually establishes 4 Christian kingdoms and does take Jerusalem from the Muslims. And then the Second Crusade is called for by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, that holy man we talked about earlier, when one of the Crusader kingdom falls to the Muslims. And then the rest of the Crusader kingdoms are conquered, and that is the Third Crusade is called for, which is actually has 3 kings on it. It's called the King's Crusade. King Richard the Lionheart of Britain, King Philip of France, and King Frederick Barbarossa of Germany. And King Frederick Barbarossa of Germany dies when his horse falls over, and he ends up getting drowned in a stream while the horse is on top of him. But King Philip makes it down there, but then decides to turn back. And King Richard is kind of the last one left, and he ends up fighting with Saladin, who is one of the great Muslim leaders of this time. And eventually Saladin offers to allow pilgrims, Christian pilgrims, to go to Jerusalem. And King Richard says, well, that's really what I was hoping for anyway. And so he returns back to Europe, and he's on his way back to England, and he decides to attack this castle in France and ends up getting killed by like either a spear or an arrow. I forget which. And so none of the kings that go, well, actually King Philip does make it back, but the other 2 kings don't. And the Crusades basically will, you know, there will be more crusades where they will try to take the Holy Land back from the Muslims, but they're never able to do it. The Fourth Crusade, like we mentioned, is where the Byzantine Empire is actually taken over for a little while by the Crusaders, who loot Constantinople, and that weakens Constantinople dramatically. But that is the Crusades. And of course, that is going to actually bring these kind of barbaric Christians into contact with the learning and the culture of the Muslim world. One of the leaders of the Crusades, Frederick II, who was also known as Frederick the Great back at that time of Germany, will actually negotiate and get back some territory just through negotiation. We're going to talk about it in a little bit. But the very last crusade is the Ninth Crusade, and they don't end up producing the result. Now, since the Pope said that if you go on this crusade, God will give you the victory, and eventually they don't get the victory that they wanted, what does this do to people's faith in the fact that the Pope is actually speaking for God? Like, is this going to make it so people are less inclined to believe the Pope when he says that he speaks for God?
Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of destroys their 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 faith that he is like who he says he is, and that he actually speaks for God. And of course, this is going to be part of that long series of events where the Pope continues to lose influence and power, and eventually is going to, you know, we'll have Martin Luther and the Reformation kind of revolt against him. All right. Meanwhile, over in North America, the Iroquois were a confederacy of 5 tribes up in what is now upstate New York. And that confederacy was created by 2 prophets, the prophet Hiawatha and Dekanawida, who was known as the Great Peacemaker. And these tribes had been warring for centuries. And these 2 prophets came and said, look, we can be much more powerful if we will all agree to a set of ground rules where we will be together in a confederacy. And so the tribes agreed, and this they kind of had a system where they all got to vote on things. So in a way, this was a very early form of democracy, which may have influenced the later colonists to come up with a democracy of their own. But this was developed back in the 1100s, and they created these longhouses that they used to house their families, and they ended up becoming a really significant power in their part of North America as a result of their kind of teaming up together. And of course, they sustain themselves both by hunting and farming. And that takes us to the Aztecs. And Vicky, I see that you're on this call. This is actually your slide. So Vicky, are you ready?
Yeah, I am.
All right. So go ahead.
Yeah, I gotta. Is this the last one?
The last one, what are you talking about?
Hold on. I thought I wrote it down on the packet, but I think it's in my notebook.
So are you ready to present on this, or do you want to take a different slide?
No, I am. I have it. All right. I'm ready.
Go for it.
All right. So the Aztecs were a poor nomadic tribe living in northern Mexico. They migrated to central Mexico around 1195 AD. They served in the Civil War by 1325 AD. They became a power in their own right. The capital of, I don't know how to say that.
All right, Tenochtitlan. Yeah. Before we get to that, let's talk about how they become a power. So you said they served in a civil war. What do you mean by that?
I don't know. I just said that they served in the Civil War.
Okay. Well, who's in charge of what is now known as Mexico? Well, who was in charge of that area at this time? We talked about them as an earlier civilization that took over from the Maya.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anybody who's in charge of? Yeah, go ahead. Somebody have their hand up there. Who's in charge of Mesoamerica at this time? Anybody remember?
Weren't they called the Toltecs?
Very good, the Toltecs, yes. All right, so the Toltecs are kind of the ruling class of the Maya world. And they had these various cities around a lake in central Mexico called Lake Texcoco. And the Aztecs come down. There's just this tribe from the north, and they're kind of extreme. They're a little on the weird side. They have this little god that was carved out of wood called Huitzilopochtli, left wing hummingbird or something like that. And they had this weird kind of conception of their religion. Did you get anything, Vicky, on what their religion is? Like, it's a little different from the Toltecs. The Toltecs would sacrifice human beings to please the gods, to open up the doorway, to talk to the gods. But what are the Aztecs? What's their particular take on that?
I don't think I got anything on that.
Anybody know? Anybody seen like Apocalypto or anything? Anybody know what do Aztecs believe they must do to speak to the gods? Nobody? It's a kind of human sacrifice, but it's really kind of bloody and awful. It's where they believe that they actually need to cut a person's heart out and then offer it up to this god, the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, and then throw it into a fire in order for the sun god to get it. And they believe that they are going to keep winning battles and keep getting victories. The more hearts that they gave to the god, the more victories they would get. So obviously they're a little weird, they're just a little on the bloodthirsty side. And so they come down, and these various Toltec, cities, which are ruled by Toltec rulers, but have a lot of Maya people living in them, they're fighting with each other, and they come down and serve as mercenaries. Does anybody know what is a mercenary?
Aren't they like paid soldiers?
Right, paid soldiers who basically fight for somebody else. So these mercenaries end up, like the Aztecs end up getting a reputation as really good. So like one of the kings is like, I really want you guys to like not just to pay you sometimes to fight for us, but I want you to be part of our kingdom, because I want you to be part of our army. So I'm going to offer my daughter to your priest king, which each of these tribes kind of had a ruler who was also their high priest, and that will basically pull us together, as you will become part of my kingdom. You will get to settle in my kingdom and get lands and whatnot. And the priest king sacrifices this girl, and like they, it's really kind of a bloody thing what they do to her. But when the king finds out about it, he's like enraged that his daughter has been killed in this way, and so he attacks the Aztecs, and the Aztecs are scattered into the swampy areas around this lake. And it seems like the Aztecs are done for, but their priest king is like, no, the god has told me, the god Huitzilopochtli has told me, that where we see an eagle with a snake in its mouth land on a cactus, that is where we will build the greatest city in this part of the world. And so has anyone seen this symbol before? An eagle with a snake in its mouth landing on a cactus. Does this look familiar at all?
It looks really similar to the Mexico flag.
Yes. Okay. And actually, the word Mexico comes from the word Aztec warrior, Mexica. So yes, the symbol on the Mexican flag is the symbol of this kind of story from the Aztec people. And yep, sure enough, they see an eagle with a snake in its mouth land on a cactus. And he's like, okay, right here, we're building a city. And it's like out in the middle of this like swampy area around the lake. And they're like, really? And they're like, yeah, bring dirt. And they start bringing dirt, and they build an artificial island out in the middle of this lake, and it keeps expanding into the lake. And they start farming like little like these little things, like they put these like mats made of reeds onto the lake, and then they like plant things in them and they farm them. And anyway, the city becomes bigger and bigger and conquers more and more territory around it, and eventually is huge. It's been one of the biggest cities in the world. It's got like 100,000 people living in it. It's called Tenochtitlan, and it's got a giant pyramid in the middle of it, which is the pyramid to Huitzilopochtli. And at the top of that pyramid is where the priest would take a captive and cut their heart out and offer it to the god, and then kick the body down the steps and throw the heart into the fire. Yeah, it's just a crazy, like, how vicious and brutal they were in many ways, but also this incredible city they built. So Vicky, pick up the story there. What do the Aztecs end up doing as time goes by? You can use the maps on the side to kind of illustrate that a little bit if you want. Vicky?
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. So pick up from there. Like, so the Aztecs have established themselves. They've created their capital city. They've beaten the other Toltec kingdoms around the Lake Texcoco. So what do they end up doing as time goes by?
I didn't really get a lot, but like after that, like the conquered lands that they like conquered, they taxed them, and it was like they ruled over 80,000 square miles throughout central Mexico from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific, which is now Guatemala. That's pretty much where I stopped.
Okay, yeah, and so like you can see here the maps of them, their empire getting bigger and bigger. Now they believed that their god was actually giving them these victories because they were giving their god what? What did they believe they were getting the victories in exchange for? Anyone? What were they supposed to give to their god in order to get like wins?
Human hearts.
Human hearts. So the more victories they win, what do you think they do with a lot of the captives they get from those battles?
Sacrifice them.
They sacrifice them in huge numbers, like thousands and thousands of people were being sacrificed and their hearts were being thrown into the fire. So this is probably the bloodiest human sacrifice religion anywhere in the world, in all of world history. And so it's horrible what they did to people. But eventually they're going to run into Europeans who are going to show up, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But for about 400 years they are going to just be like 300 to 400 years, actually more like 300. Well, actually, wait a minute, no, I'm sorry, I'm looking at it wrong. About 250-ish years they're going to be like the terror of central Mexico, and like Vicky said, they're going to rule this vast empire, and they were still expanding it at the time when the Europeans show up under Hernando Cortez. So we'll talk about that when we get to it, but that is the Aztec Empire. Yes, go ahead, Julia.
Did he like still exist?
Tenochtitlan, excellent question. Does it still exist? Anybody know what happened to the great Aztec city of Tenochtitlan? Hernando Cortez. Well, I hate to spoil the story, but they when it gets conquered by the Europeans, they will level it. They will level the entire city, and they will build their own capital city on top of it. What capital city is now built right on top of the old Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, where the Great Pyramid once stood? Anyone? It's the capital of Mexico. What's the capital of Mexico? Anybody know their geography well enough to know that? Mexico City. Yes, Mexico City is built right on top of it. So yeah, but we'll get to this when we get to the confrontation between Cortez and Montezuma, who was the Aztec king, in a little while. But that takes us actually to kind of where we start to really slow down and get into more of the details of history, and we're not hitting highlights anymore. So that takes us to 1200, and we're going to start by just taking a look at the world in 1200. Okay, so here are the various empires of the world. We've talked about a lot of these. So if I were to ask you, like, what is the greatest empire or the strongest empire in the world at this time? Anybody just looking at this map, what would you say? Anyone? I mean, there's some big ones here, but just because they're big doesn't necessarily mean they are like really sophisticated or powerful. They may just have a lot of territory under their control.
The Chinese.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the Song Dynasty China is probably the strongest, most powerful empire in the world at this time. What would you say is like, who would you give second place to? Who's another really powerful empire at this time? Just looking at the map here, you can see some that have like lots of area under their control. Go ahead, Brady.
Ayyubids.
Yes, also known as the the remnants of the Abbasid Caliphate. And so basically you've got other ones that we've talked about. You've got the Europeans over here with and really all the kingdoms of Europe were supposed to be kind of like under the control of the Holy Roman Emperor. We're going to get to this when we're going to talk about Frederick the Great in just a little bit here. So technically, you kind of could look at them as all together, but really they were in separate kingdoms. And then of course we've got the beginnings of Russia, Novgorod / Rus up here. You've got your various little like tribal, groups that have control over areas. A lot of them are Muslim. So that's kind of the world in 1200. You've got Southeast Asia down here. You've got the Khmer Empire, really powerful. You've got Champa. You talked about the Srivijayan Empire down here. And so, yeah, that's kind of where things stand. And
what was like the most like practiced religion of the time?
Out of the great religions, I mean, honestly, really, polytheism, still. If you're looking at just like sheer numbers of people practicing religions, still you've got tons of people who are polytheistic, who are basically, but if you were looking at the great religions that we've talked about so far, it's a toss up between Buddhism and Islam. Because and Hinduism really is like in there as like a strong third place, because Buddhism has spread into the Far East over here, and it's being practiced in Southeast Asia via the Silk Roads. And Islam has also spread along the Silk Roads and over the Sand Roads as well. So yeah, Islam is spread this way, Buddhism is spread this way, and then Hinduism is not only practiced in India, which has a lot of people living in it, but it's also kind of filtered into Southeast Asia as well. So yeah, excellent question, actually. And of course, Christianity is got a significant number over here. So you could put probably Christianity in fourth place out of the great religions we've talked about so far. All right. That is going to take us to a world-shaking kind of person who is going to really change the way the world works. Genghis Khan is the creator of the Mongol Empire. And what he does is he unites all of these warring tribes. Okay, so if I were to go back here and just look at this map real quick, all of these various tribes in the middle of Central Asia, they fought each other on horseback, and that's much more effective than fighting on foot. And so if you were ever able to unite them all, because they were all very good at horseback warfare, and a lot of them had learned how to, shoot bows and arrows from horseback, and were just, armies that fought on foot had like no chance against these people. And so the only thing that kept them from becoming a major force in the world up to this point was the fact that they were all like divided against each other, and so they were constantly fighting each, so you had like your various groups. You had the Kyrgyz, the Uyghurs, the Naiman, the Kara, etc. You've got so many. So anyway, Genghis Khan is able to unite all of the Mongol clans together into one massive horseback army. And as a result, he is literally unstoppable. Like no power in the world can stand up to him. Not even the great power of China can stand up to Genghis Khan. And so they had these horseback warriors who they had developed a way to stay on their horse while being able to use weapons like spears and bows and arrows. They had developed a saddle which had things that you could put your feet in. Anybody, what are those called? Those leather things that you stick your feet in, so you can like literally almost stand up on the back of a horse while the horse is running, and like fire a weapon or something. Anybody know what those are called?
Right.
Stirrups. Yes, very good, Catherine. So that innovation plus this type of bow that had been created out of horns and was very powerful and accurate, made them like into this just unstoppable horseback army. Like they would just surround an army that was on foot and just circle and circle and circle and fire arrows into them until that army was just completely destroyed. But they expand their empire, and it's not animated on here, but I need to get like a map here. Let me pull one up real fast. That map was animated at one point, so you could see how big the Mongol Empire. Mongol Empire images. Oh yeah, here it is. So this is the animation. So see how the map gets bigger and bigger. So look at that. Look at how they just conquer like everything, and then it splits into 4 after Genghis Khan dies. But I'll just kind of like let you. Yeah, I'll make this bigger. So here it is. See it? It spreads. Just an incredible kind of spree of conquering. So what 2 really powerful civilizations that we talked about get beaten by the Mongols? Anyone? I mean, I mentioned one just a second ago, but let's just kind of recap because this is really important. The Chinese under the Song Dynasty, China, and what's the other one? What other civilization gets beat? Really, this is the end of the Abbasid Caliphate when their capital city of Baghdad is sacked by the Mongols. What is the other big civilization that gets beat? I just said it. Anyone?
The Abbasid Caliphate.
Right, which is okay, and I guess I said that wrong. What religion are they? What's the kind of, they're a big what empire? What religion? Islamic empire, right? So the great Chinese empire to the east and the great Islamic empire to the west are both conquered by the Mongols. And that actually is really important because the Mongols are going to then be able to kind of unite the cultures. And what trade route is going to be a trade route that they're gonna completely encompass? They're gonna have like complete control of it, that we've already talked about. Anyone? What trade route goes across from China all the way over to the Mediterranean, which was under the control, this area was under the control of the Muslims?
The Silk Road.
The Silk Roads, yeah. So the Mongols are really the only civilization in history to actually conquer China. And they are able to actually unite the entire Silk Road. And I just want to see if anybody can kind of guess this. This is where we're looking into the future a little bit. Out of the great religions, because someone would ask that was a really good question. Which religions are going to become dominant? Which religion out of the religions that we've talked about so far do you think is going to become the religion that a lot of the Mongols are going to adopt, and is going to end up spreading across Central Asia via the Silk Roads during the time that the Mongols have control? It's I mean, there's only a couple contenders here that are your top religions in the world. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Buddhism?
Well, okay, Buddhism's a good guess. Anyone else? What's the other big one that's a possibility?
Islam?
Islam. Okay, well, it actually ends up being Islam that will be the one that a lot of the Mongols will eventually end up adopting. Now, of course, under the Mongols, they actually allowed you to have whatever religion you wanted for a while, but eventually, you know, as time goes by, they will end up adopting Islam. So what ends up happening is Genghis Khan is going to unite all of the Mongol clans. They're going to conquer most of Asia, from the China in the east to the Middle East in the west, and then eventually, you know, when he dies, it's going to end up kind of getting broken up into what are known as the Ilkhanates under his successors. His son, or it's either his son or his grandson, Kublai Khan, sorry, is going to end up, yeah, it's actually going to be after Kublai Khan's death. And Kublai Khan is going to be the one who is going to conquer China and create the Yuan dynasty. But that is going to basically transfer a lot of that knowledge that was in China across the Silk Roads over to the Middle East. And how has Europe gotten into contact with the Middle East? What little series of adventures or holy wars did they go on that brought them into contact with the Muslim world? We just talked about them just a little bit ago.
The Crusades.
The Crusades. So the Crusades have caused Europe to become aware of the Muslim world. And now the Mongols have basically united this entire Silk Road trading route. And all of that know-how is going across the Silk Roads. Now, is there something that the Chinese invented? We talked about this a while back, which could be turned into a weapon, a very effective weapon. We're going to have a slide on this, but I'm just kind of like seeing if anybody can guess it ahead of time. What chemical compound that was created by the Chinese is going to end up being turned into a very effective weapon? Yes, Julia.
Gunpowder.
Gunpowder. Okay, so some of the great advances, like, because remember, we're trying to answer that question. How does, like, the group that's in fourth place, kind of like, you know, the Europeans, who, when you look at how civilized they are and how much they know, that's like pathetic compared to the other groups that we've talked about. How do they end up becoming these world conquering, you know, people? Well, one of the big things is that some of the great inventions of China are going to make their way across the Silk Roads under the Mongols, and the Europeans are going to get their hands on them, and they're going to like take them kind of to the next level. So we'll be talking about that, but that is just one of those reasons why the Mongols are so important. All right, now you'll notice that when we look at the Mongols here, one of the few parts of the world that they don't get control of is what? Anybody see down here?
India.
India. Yeah, they don't get control of India, which is weird. You know, it's like they've conquered China. China was more, if you were looking at just sheer, you know, power, China would definitely be considered more powerful than India. And the question is, how in the world do they not get control of India? Well, the answer is the Delhi Sultanate. The Delhi Sultanate is actually founded by Muhammad of Ghor, and you've got various dynasties that are kind of part of his existence, but it will conquer all of India. As a matter of fact, what is the capital of India? Anybody? Now, anybody know what is the capital of India? Oh, it's like Kylie's coming back in. Anyone? Nobody knows what the capital of India is? It's New Delhi. Okay, so Delhi, of course, is a very important kind of you know, part of India's history, and one of the great leaders of the Delhi Sultanate is Alauddin Khilji. And he is known as the defender of India because he repeatedly ambushed the Mongols as they were trying to come through the mountain passes of the Himalayas. Because remember, the Himalayas if we were looking in my classroom at my world map, you could see them, are right here, you know, at the top of India, and are a great natural barrier. And in order to get into India, you have to come through these mountain passes. And so he used the terrain to his advantage. And every time the Mongols tried to invade India, he would ambush them. And so they were able to actually maintain their freedom from the Mongols. But the empire actually will extend southward and reach its furthest extent down to almost the very tip of India under Muhammad bin Tughlaq. This will later, this sultanate will later go into decline, excuse me, when a later kind of conqueror named Tamerlane will sack Delhi. But that is a very important kind of part of Indian history. And of course, since it has the word sultanate as part of it, what religion is the Delhi Sultanate? Anyone? What religion is that? What is the word sultanate a part of? It's instead of caliphate, that's sultanate. What is that signifying? What religion? Nobody knows. It's signifying the religion of Islam. Okay, so the Delhi Sultanate, very, very important in Indian history, and we'll be talking more about it. But we need to talk now real quickly about the trade network that develops, or that has been developing for all of this time, which is the other great trade network. Well, there's three of them. There's the Silk Road, there's the sand roads across the Sahara, and then of course there is the sea roads, also known as the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And it really becomes fully developed when Muslim traders connect Africa to the rest of the Indian Ocean network, which had been functioning ever since ancient times. And really, they do this through something called the Swahili Coast, which we're actually going to talk about in just a little bit here. Actually, this is the next slide. But the sea roads of the Indian Ocean Trade Network basically spread Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism, and really this is the most sophisticated and richest trade network in the world. And how do Europeans access the goods of China? They're either through the Silk Roads or through the sea roads via what civilization? What civilization is kind of the portal through which Europeans are able to access this network and the goods of this network? Anyone? They control the Eastern Mediterranean. They had been the civilization that the Europeans had fought in the Crusades.
Wouldn't it be Islam?
It would be Islam, yeah. So Islam was kind of like the gateway to this great network. And of course, some of the things that were traded into this network from the Mediterranean area, from the Europeans, were ceramics, glassware, wine, gold, olive oil. But East Africa was providing things like ivory, gold, iron, slaves, tortoise shells, quartz, and leopard skins. Arabia, the kind of the heart of the Muslim world, had spices like frankincense, myrrh, and perfumes. India had a lot of goods that it was contributing, such as grain, honey, precious stones, cotton, textiles, spices, timber, and tortoise shells. And tin, sandalwood, cloves, nutmeg, and mace were coming from Southeast Asia, from these areas here. And of course, China, which was home to some of the greatest goods in the world, provided silk, tea, and porcelain. Yes, Taya.
What are tortoise shells used for?
Okay, does anybody remember? It's an ancient religion. It's one of the earliest religions in the world that we talked about that was still practiced in China. It's one of the great early religions. And like actually the book, I Ching, the Book of Changes. Does anybody remember what was that called, or what did they do? You could heat up a tortoise shell and watch the cracks run through the tortoise shell in like a random pattern. But you could also throw up sticks, or you could throw up coins and have them fall down. Does anybody remember what that was?
Taoism?
It's even earlier than Taoism, which does anybody remember? Yes, Scott, go ahead.
Is it Confucianism?
It's even earlier than that. This is like one of the oldest religious books in the world. Alex.
Wasn't it divination?
Divination, yeah. And divination, what is the thing that you do in divination where you have these, you heat up a tortoise shell, and it, like, you have cracks that run through it, and they're random, but they run through the various parts of the shell, which you can put like little symbols on, or you draw a card out of like a stack of cards, you know, or you throw up coins, or you throw up sticks, and they fall down in a random pattern. What do you do when you see that random pattern? You predict what from it? It's like what? Go ahead, Julia. What were you going to say?
It like predicts your future and your fortune.
Yeah, you predict the future, the fortune. You know, like, is it a good time for me to go and attack so and so? You know, and so there were still a lot of people who did that. You could believe in another religion and you could still do that. Like nowadays, what is like the common equivalent of that nowadays? Like even people who are like Christians will go to one of these people and they'll like do it. Yes, Warner, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say like a fortune teller, but probably
Yes,
not. I don't know.
a fortune teller.
Oh,
Like
it is. Okay.
tarot cards, yeah. Also horoscopes, things like that. So
I was
yeah.
also gonna say like flipping a coin, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, flipping a coin. You know, one of those little things where you shake it up and then like a little message comes up. You know, so yeah. So that was one of the big uses for tortoise shells. There were other uses as well. They were used in armor and other things, but that was one of the big ones. So excellent question, actually. So that is the sea roads of the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And really, it is an incredibly rich trade network that develops. And as a part of that, a blend of kind of Islam and African culture develops along the eastern coast of Africa. So you have Islam coming across the desert of, you know, the Sahara Desert into Western Africa and creating kind of these Islamic kingdoms over there that we talked about. But then you also have it coming into the eastern coast of Africa. And there was this blend of Arabic and African cultures. They combined Bantu, the Bantu language, and Arabic and several other languages into what we call a pidgin language, where you have words from various languages all kind of blended together. And this was called Swahili. So Swahili is actually a language that is still spoken, but it was a language of trade. And so you had these like cities that were set up, and they were Muslim cities, these great Muslim cities, Mogadishu, Lamu, Malindi, Mombasa, Zanzibar, which was actually an island off the coast of Africa here, Mozambique, and Sofala. And those cities had like networks of like kind of like trade routes that would go into the interior of Africa, and had contact with various tribes in the interior. And the tribes in the interior were able to get their hands on some of the great goods of the Indian Ocean Trade Network by bringing things to the coast that these cities wanted in return. So like, for instance, one of the things they wanted was ivory. So if you hunted elephants and you got their tusks and you brought those tusks to the coast, you could trade them for like silk from China, or porcelain, or tea, or spices, or things that you wanted. And so you kind of have this culture that develops, and the spread of what religion across the eastern coast of Africa. Anyone? What religion is really getting into Africa from this direction as well? It's already getting into Africa across the sand roads, but it's also now getting into Africa via the Swahili coast.
Is it Islam?
Islam, yeah. So Islam kind of spreads into Africa as well. So Africa is now fully part of the Indian Ocean Trade Network. And so the Indian Ocean Trade Network has been developing for a long time, but now it is like full grown. And Africa is a full partner in that as well. And of course, some of these cities become very, very influential, and later would become some of the great cities that would become like capitals and whatnot, and are still, you know, even today considered some of the great cities in Eastern Africa. So that is, and of course, you had some mosques that were built. Kilwa was the greatest of all of these cities, and the ruins of Kilwa are still there, and there's you know, Islamic mosques that were developed, etc. So that is what Swahili coast, and of course some of the African islands that are off the coast, like the Comoros and others, are also heavily influenced by Islam. All right, we have to jump all the way across to the other side of the world to South America, because there's a great civilization that is developing at this time in South America. And Chris Landaro, I saw you jump into this call a while back. He's no longer in the call. All right, this was his slide, but I'll do it. Is known as the Inca civilization. So the Inca are taking some of those earlier civilizations that we talked about and are uniting them all. By the way, does anybody know what great like landform, geographic landform runs all the way up and down the coast of South America on this side, on the western coast of South America? It's a mountain range. It's one of the great mountain ranges of the world.
The Andes.
Yes, the Andes mountain range. Okay, so they develop up in the Andes mountain range, and essentially what they do is they create these mountain roads which are made out of stone. And for whatever reason, the people who were part of the Inca civilization were gifted engineers. Like, they put like rocks together and they would fit them together in these the buildings that they built and the roads that they built through the mountains with such precision that you couldn't even slide a piece of paper in between the rocks. Like they fit together that well. And they just built these incredible kind of, you know, networks of roads and cities all across the Andes mountain range. And really, they're motivated by religion. Like a lot of the great civilizations of the world at this time, their focus is religion. And really, their religion is based out of that civilization that we talked about that came out of that mountain lake, Lake Titicaca, with Viracocha, the bearded god, if you remember. And they came into this valley, this rich valley in what is now Peru, called the Valley of Cusco. And when they came into this valley, they said, our priest king, our leader, isn't just a human being who can speak to the gods, which is what the Maya claimed, what the Toltec claimed, what the Aztec claimed, that their leader was a human being, but that human being could speak to the gods. And you know, but they said that our leader is actually a living God. He is somebody who is walking the planet as a divine. He is related to the sun god, and of course, because he is related to the sun god, he wants a certain metal which looks like the sun to cover the buildings in the capital city of the Inca, which was called Cusco. Anybody, what metal looks like the sun?
Gold.
Gold. Okay. So, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard, you know, like of the city of the legend of like the city of gold. I was trying to remember what that was called. There's been some like Disney cartoons about it, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, this is the literal city of gold. But of course, the gold is very thin. It's beaten into very thin sheets and put over rock and whatnot, and wood. But it's just an incredible, like, so like if you like walked over like a mountain ridge and you saw this city from a distance, it would gleam like the sun. It was just unbelievable. And they spread their influence all up and down the Andes mountain range. And the way that they basically kind of united everything was through a series of post roads. And this is similar to what you had way back in, I don't know, in ancient Greece, you know, kind of the story of Marathon, where the guy ran 26 miles back to the city of Athens to tell the people of Athens that they had won the battle against the Persians, and not to like let the Persians take the city. And that's where we get, you know, like the length of a marathon race from. But you know, very in a similar way, they had these runners who would run along those roads, and they would basically be able to kind of like send messages. So like they'd say the great Inca, as they called him, who was kind of the leader of the Inca Empire that everybody believed was a god. He'd be like, I want fresh fish. And so they would have somebody basically send a message through these post roads all the way down to the coast. And then the people on the coast would bring a fresh fish, and like it would just be passed off from one runner to the next, all the way up to the capital city. And this, I mean, just the sheer size of this empire is like one of the biggest in the world. You know, I mean, in comparison to things like the Mongol Empire, which was obviously bigger, but still, like lengthwise, it stretched over 3,000 miles, halfway across the continent. But it's kind of skinny because it maintains mostly. But they had contact with the Amazon rainforest and the tribes there as well. And it just was an incredible civilization, and it was very rich and powerful, especially the capital city. And one of its big features, which is actually a weakness, is that everybody just believed that like you had to do what the great Inca said no matter what, because he was a living god. And so the great Inca was unquestioned. You just did what he said. So like if you were going to try to get control of this empire, who would you want to get your hands on? Like, anyone want to guess? Like the one person that you would be able to like control the whole empire through would be who? Anyone? If they all believe he's a living god, it would be the great Inca. And so that is kind of the rise of the Inca civilization. And that is going to lead us to Europe and kind of the developments in Europe. Okay, so this is pretty important stuff. Want to see if I can get some people. So remember, if you wanted credit for, so you wouldn't have to like actually do the writing in terms of the homework, you've got to answer some questions here. So I'm going to try to give some people some opportunities to answer some questions. So you can get some, you know, you can't just be like a one-word answer. You got to like talk a little bit. But one of the things that gave the Catholic Church the power that it had in Europe was the fact that everybody was illiterate. But slowly over time, especially because of kind of the feudal system, you know, developing, and people there's more and more people who can read and write, but it's not necessarily the farmers. What group of people within the feudal system in Europe are need to be able to read and write in order to do what their jobs? Anybody? Go ahead, Scott. What were you gonna say? Scott, you have your hand up? Or you had your hand?
I accidentally
Okay.
raised it.
Oh, okay. Think about the different groups. You have your various craft guilds, but you also have your merchants. Who has to be able to write things down, keep track of things, do basic math in order to run their particular their business?
The merchants.
The merchant class. Okay, so because the merchant class was getting more and more wealthy because of the trade that they were engaged in with other parts of the world. So like, you know, they would go to the Muslims, and the Muslims would say, okay, yeah, we'll trade you some of these really awesome goods that we have from the Indian Ocean Trade Network for your gold or your olive oil or things like that. They were then able to kind of like come back and establish themselves through wealth. And then, you know, they taught the members of their family how to read and write, because you had to know how to do it to be a merchant. And slowly literacy was starting to spread into Europe. Okay. And it was kind of gaining some ground in various parts of Europe. When people can read and write, what particular threat does this pose basically to the church? Like, anybody? Yeah, Alex, what were you going to say?
It was kind of like earlier, like now that they can read and write, like they don't have to fully believe what the church tells them. They can start like thinking on their own and reading the Bible and start to find out that what the church has been telling them hasn't necessarily been true.
Okay, well, now you're saying but like there's two steps to that, what you were saying. So you were saying reading and writing is allowing them to kind of like question whether the church really is as like what the Pope really talks to God and speaks for God, like, or so one way they can do that is just by like being like, well, I don't know if this guy's really like, if this makes sense, like that this guy's really like what had happened earlier where the Pope had said, go on this great quest and we will be given victory by God, and it didn't happen. What was that? Does anybody remember? It's still kind of happening during the 1200s, but it's slowly kind of dying out. Harley, you had your mic on for a second.
The Crusades.
The Crusades. Okay. So did you have to read the Bible to figure out that the Crusades were like making it seem like the Pope really doesn't speak for God? I mean, or could you just use basic logic to figure that out? Anyone?
You didn't have to like read to know that. Like you can just use your knowledge.
Yeah, you could just kind of see, hey, that doesn't make sense. So like as you're like writing things, writing letters to other people, and people are starting to question the church a little bit, that kind of reading and writing was definitely hurting the authority of the church. But then like the other thing that Alex mentioned was reading and writing the Bible. But here's the thing. What is the Bible written in? What language? Which is a language that isn't really spoken anymore. Yeah, Taya.
Latin.
Latin. Okay. So even if you could read and write, say for instance, French, you still couldn't read and write. You still couldn't read the Bible because the Bible was in Latin. Okay. So that was a problem. You had to be able to read and write Latin. So somebody who was like a priest, someone who had learned Latin in order to be able to read the Bible for themselves, had to translate it. Okay. Now, before we get to that whole thing, there is an institution that is developed. There's two of them that are developed to kind of bring people back to saying, you know what, the church really is, something we should believe in. There's two orders of monks. One of them is established by a guy named Saint Francis of Assisi. They're called the Franciscans. And the Franciscans give up all worldly wealth, and they're poor and they're beggars, and they go from town to town and they do good things for other people. Here's Saint Francis. Supposedly he was such a gentle and nice and holy person that even the animals would come up and like talk to him. Even wild animals, like a bird, would like jump on his shoulder and feel completely safe because he was such a gentle soul. So the Franciscans took this vow of poverty. And then there was another guy by the name of Saint Dominic. And the Dominicans basically became holy because of their knowledge of the Bible. So they studied the Bible. They didn't just like look at the Bible. They studied it and really tried to like figure out the deep meanings in it. And so they set up these institutions where they would teach people the Bible, but they would also like study it, called universities. So some of the great universities of Europe were founded during this time as places to like study the Bible. So as time goes by, you have people starting to question things. And there's a guy named Peter Waldo who is a merchant. He's in the merchant class, and he translates. He learns Latin, and he translates the Bible from Latin into French. Now, that means that other people who can read French can read the actual Bible And I want to ask this question: why doesn't like everybody just revolt against the church? Like the entire, like what is keeping written things from having a wide influence? Like in order to get your hands on one of these Bibles, you have to get something that was, how do you make one of them? Like, does anybody want to like guess there? Yeah, go ahead, Brady. Like, how do you
You have
make,
to copy every single word
yeah, by what? Like, is there a
by
way?
hand.
By hand. So to make one of these Bibles is a really difficult thing. Okay. So there's not a lot of them. So the Waldensians kind of revolt against the church, and the church now feels threatened. And by the way, there's another group called the Albigensians, who believe that Jesus was not a real person, but he was more of a spirit. And that is a revival of an old form of, there was an old kind of competing philosophy. These are called heresies, the ones that aren't real, like they don't agree with like central doctrines of Christianity, called Gnosticism. Anyway, they basically believe this, and that spread all across France as well. So now the church has a problem. They have people who believe something. There's two groups, the Waldensians and the Albigensians, who agree. They believe something that doesn't agree with the central doctrines of the church, especially the doctrine that the Pope speaks for the God, and basically everything the Pope says is what God wants. So the church creates an institution to stamp out all of these dissenters. Anybody know what is the name of this institution? And it was actually mostly Dominican monks who were the ones who were kind of like the people who led this, that goes around Europe trying to get rid of all the people who believe something different than the official version of Catholic Christianity. It starts with an I, and it has gotten a really bad reputation over time because of how they try to stop people.
The Inquisition.
Oh, someone said it. Catherine, say it louder.
The Inquisition.
The Inquisition. Very good. Yes, the Inquisition. And so, does anybody know, just from their own general knowledge, how does the Inquisition try to stop people from just like having a different view of Christianity than the Catholic Church? Like, what do they do to people who they catch? Like, they say, you are a Waldensian, you're a heretic, you believe something different than what the church says everybody has to believe. What do they do to that person in order to get them to like give up their beliefs or to make an example out of them? Yes, Catherine.
Oh, I was gonna say, weren't they tortured?
Yes, they develop all of these horrible tortures. Like if you look over in the lower right-hand corner here, this is what we call the rack. And what is that happening to that person on the rack there? Like what is this big wheel doing to this person? Anybody? Like, can y'all see the picture there? What's happening to that person? Like, I'll tell you this, their feet are tied with a rope down here, and the wheel is kind of cranking them backwards, and their hands are tied to like the top of the wheel. So as the wheel gets cranked backwards, their hands are being pulled further and further up, and they're being stretched over this wheel. What's going to happen to all of their joints as they get stretched over this wheel? Like, their shoulder joints, their knee joints, their hip joints. What's going to happen to the bones as they keep getting kind of stretched over the rack there? This is a chance to get some credit here. We're getting to the end. We're almost to the end of our thing. Yes, Julia.
They're gonna break.
Yeah, and they're also going to like pull bones out of sockets and everything too,
Yeah.
right? Would that be very painful?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like, so they're saying to you, okay, you have to give up what you believe, or we're going to keep cranking this. And as they keep cranking, your shoulders are popping out of joint, your hips and your knees are popping out of joint. Are you going to say, yes, I believe what you want, I'll say what you want me to say? They're trying to get a confession out of you that you were wrong. Are you going to do it as you get tortured like that?
Yes. I was I was also gonna ask if isn't it also more likely that you would die or be like in permanent pain for that kind of thing back
Oh,
then?
sure. Like you would be,
Because, like now you can get. I mean, it's painful, but like you can get joints popped back into place, and you can get casts and stuff to heal broken bones. But like back then, you're kind of stuck.
oh yeah. And really like this basically, you know, like a lot of people who were tortured, they never recovered from their torture. But all they wanted was the confession, because once they got the confession, um sometimes what they would do, now sometimes they would say, okay, you know, we'll forgive you and allow you to come back, but a lot of times they would say, you know what, now, or if you didn't confess, like if you held on to your beliefs, you know, they would do this to you as well. They would make an example out of you. So right here, what are they doing to this person right here? uh, what is this right here? They would bring a big crowd of people together and have them all watch while what happened.
They're burning them.
They're burning them at the stake. Yes. Okay. So like all the people in the town would watch as a person, they would like put a bunch of wood underneath that person and they would light the wood on fire, and the fire would basically burn them up. And essentially this would, you know, how does this affect all the people who are watching when they're watching someone, you know, go through this because of something they believe? What is this going to motivate them to do?
It like encourages them not to do what they did.
Right. Yeah. They're like, I don't want that happening to me. So I am not going to believe that stuff. Like, so this keeps the Waldensians from having a lot of influence. And it also helps them get rid of the Albigensians. But by the way, with the Albigensians, they actually have to have a crusade inside of Europe where they get a bunch of people to go on a crusade and they like attack cities where, you know, like Albigensianism has become like the new thing. And they like take these cities over and kill all of the Albigensians, and they, you know, the Inquisition comes in and tortures them. And so the Inquisition becomes the new weapon of the church to keep people from like, you know, from believing something different. So the Catholic Church has never really lived down their, you know, the reputation that they've gotten from this, which is not a good reputation. But we are actually out of time for today. So I am going to stop um, our thing of going through the notes right here. And we were going to pick up on Thomas Aquinas when we come back into class. So this will be homework. If you said two significant things, I've been like keeping track here as we've been going through this, then you have credit for the homework already and you don't have to do the written homework. But if you didn't say enough, or if you were you get partial credit, but you still get some credit, but not all of it. But if you want to do more, you can do some of the writing to get full credit. And then yeah, that pretty much. And then people who were not here on the Zoom call, they can listen to this. This is homework. This is a way for us to kind of catch up on terms of covering enough slides to get through everything. So that is it for today. And I will see you all in class, and I'll be sending this out via email to everybody a little later today. Everybody have a great day, and I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.